and welcome to A Deeper Dive, where you, the viewers, get the opportunity to examine, explore, and hopefully do the work that the guests on Iyanla FIX My Life are doing. This week we are going to dissect, if you will, episode 2 of a powerful story of motherless daughters and lies that we tell our family members. Just so that you can be caught up, we have the mother, Alicia, and her 6 daughters, 4 of whom she raised, 2 of whom she gave up for adoption. And last week, when we were introduced to this family, we found out that there was a major breakdown between Alicia and her older daughter and among the daughters themselves, particularly Precious, who had been given up for adoption. This week, we got a little more history about Alicia and her life and the patterns and pathology of this family. 3 generations of women did not raise their children. Alicia, Alicia's mother, and Alicia's grandmother, all of whom had 6 children and all of whom did not raise her children. We also came to understand that Alicia moved around from family member to family member, which indicated some breakdown between her and her mother, and that in that process that Alicia was molested by a family member, another issue that plagues many families, and that it was never addressed, that the man who violated her remained in the family, that it was never discussed, it was never spoken about, and that the child produced from that encounter is Alicia's oldest daughter, Shay. I remember when doing the story, I had to pray quickly and hard about whether or not to share that information with Shay, because it is very delicate psychological and emotional information. But the thing that came to me very clearly was that the breakdown between Alicia, the mother, and the oldest daughter, Shay, in part was due to the fact that Alicia had been violated, that Shay was the product of that violation, and that Shay was still in close and deep relationship with her father, the family member who violated Alicia. And I asked her about that. How did she feel about it? And she said she didn't like it, but she wasn't as clear about how that impacted her relationship with Shay. So as all children do, make everything about them, Shay made it about her. She was convinced that her mother had betrayed her and abandoned her and denied her and neglected her and just cast her off because something was wrong with her. And I believe that a lot of it had to do with the fact that Shay was in relationship with the man who had violated her mother. The other thing that we got clear about this week, or much clearer about this week, is the friction between the siblings and how, just like their mother withheld information from them, they withheld information from each other. And the big part that created most of the breakdown in this family, that created most of the breakdown in most families, is the fact that they simply didn't know how to communicate. They could communicate their upsets, they could communicate their displeasures, but they didn't know how to ask for what they want, say what they felt, and they didn't know how to listen. Remember, communication is a 2-way street. You've got to be able to speak, but you also got to be able to hear and listen. Hearing with your ears and listening with your heart, so that what is coming in, you can hear it the way it's intended. That was a huge problem in this family, and it's a huge problem for many families. Because when the emotional stakes are high, we will go on the defensive or the attack rather than to give one another the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to talk about that. I want to give you some tools to address that. The other thing that we saw very clearly in this week's episode that I began to address in last week's episode is how, as the parent, Alicia could not hear her children's experience without feeling attacked by them. Just in them sharing their thoughts, perhaps it was their tone of voice, or sharing how they felt, and perhaps it was the feelings that they were having. She took it on as a personal attack against her, and no matter how I tried, no matter what I said, she could not hear. This is just how they were experiencing her. And so she did what so many of us do when we get uncomfortable, or when we feel attacked, or when we go on the defense. She attempted to leave. I just had to breathe through that one long and hard, because I was very clear that if she were to walk out of this process that was initiated by the children, that chances are they would never be able to recover. So to get her to stay, I had to go to 10 with her and support her in understanding that the pattern and the pathology that she lived, she had passed on to her children. The pattern and pathology of not being present, the pattern and pathology of not being able to hear, the pattern and pathology of feeling attacked, the pattern and pathology of not accepting responsibility for her children's experience that was now manifesting as their adult upset with her. Whew, that was a hard one. And if you remember from episode 1, I was very clear with her and said, you're going to have to sit in this. You're going to have to hear things that are going to be hard for you to hear. And the reason she couldn't do it was because no one ever heard her. And no one ever taught her how to stand in the truth of her experience. And that is the pattern and the pathology that she lived and that she passed on to her daughters. So they knew how to yell, they knew how to cuss, they knew how to call names, but they didn't know how to be connected to one another, heart to heart, love to love. That happens in so many families. We just aren't taught the skills. We just aren't given the information that we need to be able to recognize and understand, A, you have a right to feel what you feel. Everybody may not agree with your feelings, and that's okay. They're your feelings. You have a right to feel what you feel. What you must learn, what we must all learn, is how to process ourselves through those feelings and how not to make anybody else responsible for what we feel. They're responsible for what they did, and in some cases they are accountable for their behaviors, but no one is responsible for your feelings. Your feelings are your feelings, and you get a right to have them, you get a right to express them, but it is your responsibility to process yourself through them. This family didn't have those skills. We're going to deal with that in episode 3. The other very important lesson here is when you attack, the recipient of that attack is going to go on the defense. It's just a natural human response. And in this family, they attacked. They attacked from their broken place. They attacked from their wounded place with absolutely no desire to hurt the other person. It was just the way they had learned patterns and pathologies, the way they had learned to get their feelings out. And particularly when you're talking about 6 children and 1 mother, they've got to get their time in, they've got to get their feelings out, they've got to get their voice heard very quickly. One of the things that I did in episode 1 was I tried to establish a level of order among the sisters, from the oldest to the youngest. That is so important. I grew up like that, and people don't teach that anymore. That the older siblings have a certain amount of authority and you have to give deference to them. Now, I know that doesn't always work out well, but at least if you have the idea or the beginning of the lesson, you know that your older sisters, you look up to them, or your older siblings, you look up to them and you listen to them, because in my family, my older sister was responsible for my brother and me. I taught my children to be responsible in that line, and I tried to establish that among these 6 sisters, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but the key was, because the breakdown occurred between the eldest sister and the mother, the ones under her followed suit. They all felt it was acceptable and normal to be disrespectful to the mother. And I don't care what the mother did. In her face, you've got to honor who she is. I know that's hard. I know that's hard, and I know people out there saying, well, what if she's a drug addict, and what if she don't respect me, and what if she's a drunk, and what if she's whatever. Well, here in this story, we had a mother who had a crack addiction and who left her children at home. But that is no reason, no excuse for any of the children to call her out of her name. And we're going to deal with that in episode 3. So what are some of the important lessons in this episode of this story about motherless daughters and family lives? First of all, in this episode, we really saw how the mother's absence impacted the children, to the degree that one of the daughters, in her desire to demonstrate mothering, had 7 children at the age of 29. We're going to see how that turns out. But at least she was there with her children, and she was trying to prove to herself and to her mother that there's no reason to give your children away. Not sure that's a good reason to have children, but that's where we are in this particular family. The other very important lesson to get from here is that when you don't deal with an issue, the issue just gets bigger. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So by the time the blow up occurs between Alicia and her daughters, it's very nasty. And again, you'll see that in episode 3. In this episode, another very important lesson, I think it is about sometimes distance doesn't make the heart grow fonder. We have to figure out ways and find ways and develop ways and learn ways to stay connected over distance. We cannot take our loved ones for granted. We can't think that they just know how we feel. Again, family is about how we relate to and relationship. So when there's distance between family members, we have to find a way to remain connected. In this day and age, a text, a call, a card. I always say that I love the dollar store. They have lots and lots of cards. Buy a group and send one out every day, or at least once a week, and create a pattern of connection so that those who are separated from the core of the family don't feel that they've been cast off. Again, this was a very powerful episode this week. We saw the impact of family stories, family lives. We saw the impact of what happens when a mother isn't available or present or in their children's lives in a meaningful way. We saw the breakdown between siblings and how that breakdown is as much a product of what happens as it is a product of the family pattern and pathology. So hopefully this family is going to learn something that's going to correct the situation so that the next generation can benefit from the learnings that they receive. If you're having problems in your family, if any of these situations seem familiar to you, again, I want to encourage you. Breathe. Breathe through it. Give yourself permission to feel, write it out, and learn how to talk it out. Here's an exercise you can do. If you've gotten upset with someone in your blood family, I'm talking sibling, parent, cousin, adopted brother, sister, write them a letter. Write them a letter and let them know how you feel. Just put it all down on paper. What you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you experienced, what they did, what you did. Say the things you need to say on a piece of paper and give yourself permission to really go there. Write it all out in a letter addressed to that person. And before you end that letter, start forgiving. What are you willing to forgive them for? And more important, what are you willing to forgive yourself for? Because every upset that you have with someone else is a reflection of a judgment that you're holding about them or against them. And the way to clear your judgments is forgiveness. So, next week is our final episode with this Burton family, and more issues come to the surface. I tell you, this story had more twists and turns in it. Powerful, powerful healing opportunity for the family and for you. So I hope you will tune in. I thank you if you have tuned in, and I hope that you heard something here that'll be helpful for you. Until next time.